All right, guys, welcome to the review video for our fundamentals first quiz, and that is not a verse quiz, by the way, our first quiz. And as I always say, of course, you are responsible for anything that you have written in your notes, by the way, as well as any of the reading material that you covered outside of the notes, any of those reading guides there. That material could be on here as well. Um, the quiz, let me tell you what it looks like. I will try to make sure I go through everything on here, and so hopefully that is true. But there is a matching section, and that is matching different people with what they did. There is a multiple choice section, and there is a rather large short answer section, which I know you guys will enjoy. There's also one essay on here. My favorites, essay questions, all right? So let me give you a few things to look over there. Of course, we think about that very first lesson, the introduction to the fundamentals. We talked about different isms and things that were happening at the late 1800s, early 1900s that caused the men to write the fundamentals. Of course, we talked about Julius Wellhausen, who really kind of pushed forward the idea of higher and lower criticism. He was the one that wrote the book History on Israel and kind of reworked a lot of the time frames that were originally thought there. We mentioned Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism. That happened in 1830. We also talked about the German rationalists Immanuel Kant and G. Hegel gave the idea of relative truth. Friedrich Nietzsche, the idea of existentialism. I always have a hard time with that word. You're free to create your own world however you choose to create it. We mentioned the theory of evolution given by Charles Darwin. Progressive education by John Dewey. We also mentioned some of the cults there. Seventh-day Adventism by Ellen G. White. Jehovah's Witness, Charles Taze Russell. The Christian Science Group, Mary Baker Eddy. Unity Group, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. All right, that was a husband and wife team. Then we mentioned modern psychology, Sigmund Freud, all of these taking place in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And finally, right at 1900, the charismatic movement or Pentecostalism, founded by Charles Parham. We mentioned that the fundamentals are a group of essays, and they were written to combat these different deceptive views that were coming into play. The chief organizer was R.A. Torrey and A.C. Dixon. And we mentioned some of the faulty basis on which the idea of higher criticism is based on. We mentioned three different things. They have subjective conclusions. They're based on German fancies. Of course, we talked about all those German rationalists and their crazy ideas. And they're anti-supernaturalists, which means that they don't believe in miracles. They try to explain everything by natural causes. Then we gave you a list of different men that had quite a bit to do with higher criticism. And I gave you a whole list. There's just a few that you probably really need to highlight. And that is Spinoza. He is the, you might say, the originator of higher criticism. All right. Now, don't get him confused with a man named Eckhorn, who is often called the father of higher criticism. And we call him the father of higher criticism because he's the one to actually coin the term. All right. So if you kind of think about it, Spinoza's the originator. Eckhorn is the father of higher criticism. And then we mentioned that Julius Wellhausen was kind of the one that really pushed it out there and got everybody into it. Also, Wellhausen's kind of partner in crime, Mr. Graff, he's the one that advocated the idea of the Jehovistic, Elohistic documents. Speaking of those documents, we mentioned the JEDP theory. And of course, you want to know what each of those letters stand for. J standing for Jehovistic, or maybe Yahwistic, sometimes you hear it said. The E stands for Elohist, all right, or Elohistic. The C stands for Deuteronomist, all right, and the fourth one, the P stands for the priestly code. And of course, we talked quite a little bit about that theory that there was a guy, that wrote J, and there was a guy that wrote E, and then finally a redactor came through and put J and E together, and later there was a guy that wrote D, and then another redactor came and kind of added D to J and E and kind of mixed it up and added some new stuff, and then finally, Ezra and Ezekiel put together the priestly code, wrote Moses' name on it, and threw it in with J-E-D, and you get the whole, you might say, Old Testament that way. Of course, we don't believe that. We mentioned several books that higher critics kind of mess around with. Of course, we mentioned Isaiah. And one of the favorite things that people like to do with Isaiah is say that Isaiah chapter 1 through 40 is kind of designated to one writer, and then 41 to 66 designated to another Isaiah or second Isaiah. We mentioned they especially like to pick on the book Deuteronomy. And one of the theories is that the book of Deuteronomy was actually a forgery that was supposedly found during the reign of King Josiah. Of course, as the story in the Bible says, that they found the book of the law in the temple. And for higher critics, they say, well, that wasn't the old Mosaic book of the law. That was actually the book of Deuteronomy. And those priests actually wrote it and aged it, made it look like it was old, but it really wasn't. And they passed it off in a forgery. All right, I'll be praying for you guys to be able to pass this quiz, and we'll see you on Thursday.